It's 1933, the heart of the Great Depression. America is on its knees. The stock market, once a symbol of roaring 20s optimism, is a smoldering ruin. 1 out of every 4 people is unemployed. Breadlines snake around city blocks. And on New York's Fifth Avenue, a street once so gilded it was called Millionaire's Row, a symphony of destruction is underway. One by one, the great houses are coming down. These aren't just homes, they are palaces, marble and limestone behemoths built to rival the châteaux of French kings and the country seats of English lords. The Vanderbilt mansions, the Astor Palace, symbols of a fortune and a confidence that seemed just a decade earlier as permanent as the stars. Now, they are being reduced to rubble, their opulent guts ripped out and sold for scrap. The land beneath them, even in a depression, is worth more than the dreams they were built on. Across the country, the story is the same. From the Gold Coast of Long Island to the shores of Lake Michigan, the great estates of America's industrial titans are dying. By the end of the decade, hundreds will be gone, some sold for a pittance, some simply abandoned, their gardens choked with weeds, their windows boarded up like vacant eyes. A staggering statistic hangs in the air. By 1933, 10% of all homes in America are bank-owned. 10%. Let that sink in for a moment. Not just shacks and farmhouses, but mansions, too. Grand, glorious, impossibly expensive mansions. But here's what makes this story truly remarkable. While 500 of these Gilded Age giants failed, one of them, perhaps the most audacious of them all, survived. Not just survived. It thrived. It wasn't in New York, where such extravagance might make a twisted kind of sense. It wasn't in the established enclaves of the old money elite. No, this palace was built in the mountains of North Carolina, a remote, rugged landscape that was, at the time, the very definition of the middle of nowhere. We're talking about a house with 250 rooms. To put that in perspective, the White House has 132 rooms. This place was nearly twice as big. It had 4 acres of floor space under a single roof. That's the size of 3.5 football fields. It had 35 bedrooms, 43 bathrooms, and 65 fireplaces. It was, and still is, the largest private home ever built in America. So how? How did this impossible, magnificent, and frankly, absurdly large mansion stare into the abyss of the Great Depression and not blink? How did it survive when hundreds of its peers in supposedly more advantageous locations crumbled into dust? And perhaps most intriguingly, what was the secret that allowed it to not just endure, but to become a blueprint for a new kind of legacy? To answer those questions, we need to understand the man who dared to build it in the first place. His name was George Washington Vanderbilt II, and he was different. While his older brothers, Cornelius and William, were groomed to take over the family's railroad and shipping empire, George was the quiet one, the scholar, the dreamer. Imagine you're in the Vanderbilt family in the 1880s. Your name is synonymous with unimaginable wealth and cutthroat business. Your grandfather, the Commodore, was a titan of industry, a man who bent the world to his will. Your brothers are expanding the family's railroad lines, fighting off competitors and amassing even greater fortunes. They are building massive, showy mansions on Fifth Avenue to cement their status at the apex of New York society. But George saw it differently. He saw potential in something other than stocks and bonds. He became educated. Truly educated. He was fluent in 8 languages. He had a personal library of over 23,000 books. And here's the thing. These weren't books bought by the yard to impress visitors. George had read them, annotated them in multiple languages, and engaged with the ideas inside. He was a man of deep intellectual curiosity, more at home in a library than a boardroom. And in 1888, on a trip with his mother to the mountains of western North Carolina, he found the place that would become his life's work. He stood on a peak, looked out at the rolling blue-tinged mountains, and saw not a wilderness to be conquered, but a canvas to be painted. He began buying land, not just a few acres for a summer cottage. He bought 125,000 acres. That's over 195 square miles, an area larger than the entire city of Chicago. Let that sink in. He was creating a private kingdom in the heart of Appalachia, and at its center, he would build his home. He called it Biltmore. To design it, he hired the 2 most famous names in American design, the architect Richard Morris Hunt, and the landscape architect Frederick Law Olmsted, the man who designed Central Park. The vision was audacious, a French Renaissance château, a working estate that would be entirely self-sufficient, and a model of scientific forestry and agriculture. This wasn't just about building a big house, it was about creating a new kind of American ideal, one that blended European elegance with a deep respect for the land. Construction began in 1889. It was a monumental undertaking. A private railway spur had to be built just to bring materials to the site. An entire village, Biltmore Village, was constructed to house the hundreds of craftsmen and their families. Italian stonemasons, French artisans, English woodworkers, Spanish tile setters. The best in the world were brought to this remote corner of North Carolina. For 6 years, they toiled, creating a masterpiece of craftsmanship that was unparalleled in America. The scale of the construction was staggering. Imagine coordinating the work of over 1,000 craftsmen, each speaking a different language, each a master of their particular trade. The limestone for the exterior was quarried on site. The bricks for the interior walls were fired in kilns built specifically for the project. Every detail, from the hand-carved oak paneling to the intricate plasterwork on the ceilings, was executed with a level of precision and artistry that is almost impossible to find today. The oak for the grand staircase was hand-selected from forests across America. The tapestries were purchased from European dealers who specialized in pieces that had once adorned royal palaces. The marble for the floors was imported from Italy. The wrought iron gates were forged by master blacksmiths. This wasn't just construction, it was creation. And then there was the technology. Biltmore was, in many ways, a house of the future. It had electricity, powered by its own hydroelectric plant. It had central heating, a revolutionary luxury at the time. It had refrigeration, indoor plumbing with hot and cold running water, and even an early version of an intercom system. George Vanderbilt was not just building a monument to the past, he was embracing the cutting edge of modern technology. On Christmas Eve, 1895, George Vanderbilt officially opened Biltmore to his family and friends. Imagine the scene. A house lit by thousands of electric lights, a marvel in itself at the time. A 35-foot-tall Christmas tree in the banquet hall, its ceiling soaring 7 stories high. Guests wandering through rooms filled with priceless art, tapestries that had once hung in the palaces of kings, and a library that was a testament to a life of the mind. The banquet hall alone could seat 64 people at a single table, and the winter garden, with its glass roof and exotic plants, created a tropical oasis in the middle of the Appalachian winter. The guests that Christmas Eve included some of the most prominent names in American society. They arrived by train, were picked up in carriages, and driven through the 3-mile approach to the house. As they rounded the final curve and saw the château for the first time, illuminated against the dark mountain sky, they must have gasped. It was unlike anything they had ever seen in America. It was European grandeur transplanted to the American wilderness. It was a statement, a declaration that America had arrived, that it could rival the old world in art, architecture, and sophistication. But here's the hidden truth about Biltmore. While it looked like a monument to Gilded Age excess, it was built on a different foundation. George Vanderbilt wasn't just a collector, he was a visionary. He saw the forests around his estate not as timber to be clear-cut, but as a resource to be managed and sustained. He hired Gifford Pinchot, who would later become the first chief of the U.S. Forest Service, to create the first managed forest in America. This wasn't just about preservation, it was about creating a sustainable, profitable enterprise from the land itself. He was thinking even then about the long game. Pinchot's work at Biltmore was revolutionary. He implemented selective cutting, where only mature trees were harvested, allowing the forest to regenerate naturally. He replanted areas that had been damaged by previous logging. He created fire breaks and trails. He turned what had been a degraded landscape into a thriving, productive forest. And he proved that conservation and commerce were not mutually exclusive. The forest could provide timber and still remain healthy and beautiful. It was a radical idea, and it would influence American forestry policy for generations to come. George also established a dairy, a farm, a poultry operation, a piggery. The goal was for the estate to feed itself, to provide for its residents, and to be a model of scientific agriculture. He imported Jersey cows from England, Berkshire pigs from Europe, and experimented with the latest techniques in animal husbandry and crop rotation. This was a radical idea for a man of his class. While his peers were extracting wealth from the country, George Vanderbilt was investing in it, nurturing it, and trying to build something that would last. He had no idea that this forward-thinking, almost un-Vanderbilt-like approach would be the very thing that would save his creation from the coming storm. George married Edith Stuyvesant Dresser in 1898, and their only child, Cornelia, was born at Biltmore in 1900. For a brief shining moment, Biltmore was everything George had dreamed it would be. A family home, a center of intellectual life, and a thriving, self-sustaining estate. But tragedy struck in 1914. George Vanderbilt died suddenly at the age of 51, following complications from an appendectomy. He left behind a widow, a young daughter, and a magnificent, impossibly expensive estate. The dream was now in their hands, and the world was about to change in ways no one could have imagined. Imagine you're Edith Vanderbilt in 1914. Your husband, the visionary force behind this massive enterprise, is gone. You are left with a 125,000-acre estate, a 250-room mansion, and a young daughter to raise. The cost of maintaining Biltmore was astronomical, even for a Vanderbilt. George had poured his inheritance into the estate, and while it was designed to be self-sustaining, it was not yet profitable. The forestry and farming operations were still in their infancy. The house required a staff of over 80 people just to keep it running. The annual operating costs were staggering. Edith was a capable and intelligent woman. She honored her husband's vision, continuing his philanthropic work and managing the estate as best she could. But the financial pressure was immense. The estate taxes alone were crippling. In a move that was both a financial necessity and a tribute to George's conservationist ideals, she sold nearly 87,000 acres of the estate's mountain woodland to the federal government for less than $5 an acre. This land would become the nucleus of the Pisgah National Forest, one of the first national forests in the eastern United States. It was a painful decision, but a necessary one. It reduced the tax burden and provided a much-needed infusion of cash. But it also meant that George's grand vision of a 125,000-acre estate was now reduced to a more manageable but still substantial 8,000 acres. The sale was controversial. Some in the family felt that Edith was giving away their inheritance, but she understood something that others didn't. She understood that George's legacy was not just the land itself, but the idea behind it. The idea of conservation, of sustainable forestry, of protecting the natural world for future generations. By selling the land to the federal government, she ensured that it would be protected forever. She turned a private forest into a public treasure. And in doing so, she honored her husband's deepest values. In 1924, Cornelia Vanderbilt, now the heir to Biltmore, married a British aristocrat, the Honorable John Francis Amherst Cecil. The wedding was a grand affair, a throwback to the Gilded Age splendor of Biltmore's early days. Over 1,500 guests attended, and the ceremony was held at All Souls Church in Biltmore Village. For a moment, it seemed like the estate's future was secure. The Cecils had two sons, George Henry Vanderbilt Cecil in 1925 and William Amherst Vanderbilt Cecil in 1928, both born in the same Louis XV room where Cornelia herself had been born. The line of succession was established. The house was once again filled with the sounds of a young family. But then came October 29, 1929, Black Tuesday, the day the music stopped. The stock market crash wiped out fortunes overnight. Stocks that had been worth millions became worthless pieces of paper. Banks failed. Businesses collapsed. The ensuing Great Depression was a cataclysm that spared no one, not even the Vanderbilts. The value of their stocks and bonds plummeted. The income that had supported their lavish lifestyles for generations dwindled to a trickle. The world they had known, the world of endless wealth and unquestioned privilege, was gone. For the great houses of America, it was a death sentence. The cost of heating a 50-room mansion, of paying the army of servants required to run it, of maintaining acres of manicured gardens, it became an unbearable burden. One by one, the lights went out on Millionaires' Row. The Vanderbilt Triple Palace, three interconnected mansions at 5th Avenue and 52nd Street, the largest private residence in New York City with 137 rooms, was sold and demolished in 1926, even before the crash. The writing was on the wall. The age of the urban palace was over. The Depression just accelerated the process. The Cornelia Vanderbilt II mansion at 57th Street and 5th Avenue, allegedly the largest single-family house in New York City, with its brick and limestone facade and lavish interiors, was sold to a realty corporation in 1926 and demolished to make way for the Bergdorf Goodman department store. The William K. Vanderbilt mansion at 660 5th Avenue was demolished in 1926 and replaced by 6666 5th Avenue, now home to a Zara store. The Astor Mansion, the seat of the Mrs. Astor's legendary social reign, was torn down in 1926 and replaced by Temple Emmanuel Synagogue. The pattern was clear. The land was more valuable than the buildings, the cost of upkeep was too high, and the cultural values that had once celebrated such ostentatious displays of wealth had shifted. The modern estate tax, which began in 1916, made it increasingly difficult for wealthy families to pass their fortunes to the next generation intact. The tax rates climbed higher and higher, reaching 70% by the 1930s. Suddenly, the great houses were not just expensive to maintain, they were expensive to inherit. The financial mathematics of the Gilded Age no longer worked, but Biltmore's challenge was different. It wasn't a city mansion, easily sold for its land value. It was a sprawling country estate, a world unto itself. Demolishing it was unthinkable, but keeping it was becoming impossible. The income from the farm and dairy, while significant, was not enough to cover the immense operating costs of the house. The taxes alone were crippling. The Cecils were faced with a terrible choice: let Biltmore slowly decay or find a radical new way to save it. Imagine the conversations they must have had, sitting in the magnificent library, surrounded by the books George Vanderbilt had so loved, the fire crackling in one of the 65 fireplaces. Outside, the world was falling apart. Inside, they were trapped in a gilded cage, a beautiful, priceless, and utterly unsustainable inheritance. They were asset-rich and cash-poor, a classic dilemma of the declining aristocracy. They had the house, but they couldn't afford to live in it. Other wealthy families were facing the same crisis. Charles Schwab, the steel magnate, had built Riverside, a 75-room mansion on the Hudson River, and a 90-room château in New York City. He lost his fortune and his mansions even before the 1929 crash. The Phipps family, the Whitneys, the Goulds, all were forced to downsize, to sell off their grand estates, to adapt to a new, more modest reality. The idea of maintaining a 250-room house for a single family seemed not just extravagant, but obscene in a time of widespread suffering. It was a moral question as much as a financial one. The city of Asheville, which had grown up around Biltmore and benefited from its construction, was also in dire straits. The city had gone on a borrowing and building spree in the 1920s, constructing new schools, roads, and public buildings. The crash left it with the highest per capita debt of any city in America. It would take them 50 years to pay it off. The local economy was devastated. Tourism, which had been a growing industry, had dried up. People didn't have money for vacations. They were struggling to put food on the table. It was in this context of personal and public crisis that a group of Asheville city leaders approached Cornelia and John Cecil with a desperate, audacious proposal. A proposal that would have been unthinkable just a few years earlier. A proposal that would change the destiny of Biltmore forever. They asked the Cecils to do something no Vanderbilt had ever done before. They asked them to open their home to the public, to charge admission, to turn their private sanctuary into a tourist attraction. Let's be clear about what this meant. This wasn't like opening a museum. This was their home, the rooms where their children played, the dining room where they ate their meals, the bedrooms where they slept. The idea of charging strangers to walk through your private residence was, for people of their class and background, deeply uncomfortable. It was tantamount to admitting you couldn't afford to keep the place up. It was a public declaration of financial distress. It was, in the eyes of many of their peers, a humiliation. But here's the character contrast that defines this story. while other wealthy families retreated behind their high walls, clinging to the last vestiges of their privacy and their pride. Cornelia and John Cecil made a different choice. They saw the bigger picture. They understood that Biltmore was more than just their home. It was the economic engine of the entire region. It was the legacy of Cornelia's father, and it was a work of art that deserved to be seen. They put the survival of the estate and the welfare of their community above their own personal comfort and pride. They agreed. On March 15, 1930, Biltmore House opened its doors to the public. The admission price was $2, about $36 in today's money. The Cecils hoped that this would generate enough income to preserve the estate, and just as importantly, to boost tourism and help the struggling city of Asheville. It was a gamble, a huge gamble. No one knew if people would come. Who had money for tourism in the middle of the Great Depression? But they came. Not in droves at first, but they came. People from all over the country, drawn by the curiosity of seeing how the other half, or rather the other 0.1%, lived. They walked through the banquet hall, their footsteps echoing in the vast space. They marveled at the winter garden with its glass roof and exotic plants. They peered into the bedrooms, the kitchens, the bowling alley, the swimming pool. It was a glimpse into a fantasy world, a world of unimaginable luxury that was rapidly disappearing. For many, it was a form of escapism, a brief respite from the harsh realities of the Depression. Imagine you're one of those first visitors. You've paid your $2, a significant sum at the time. You drive through the gates, and for 3 miles, you see nothing but forest and fields, all part of the estate. Then, you round a bend, and there it is. A castle, straight out of a fairy tale, sitting in the middle of the Blue Ridge Mountains. You walk inside, and you are transported to another world, a world of tapestries, armor, and art, a world where a single family lived in a space that could house a small town. You see the 10,000-pound chandelier hanging in the banquet hall. You see the Pellegrini ceiling painting in the library. You see the Napoleon chess set, the Renoir paintings, the Persian rugs. It's overwhelming. It's magnificent. And for a few hours, you forget about the breadlines and the unemployment and the fear. You walk through the bowling alley, one of the first in a private home. You see the indoor swimming pool, heated and filtered, a technological marvel for its time. You stand in the winter garden, surrounded by palms and orchids, and you can almost forget that outside, it's winter, and the world is in crisis. For many visitors, it was the experience of a lifetime, a glimpse into a world they would never otherwise see. For the Cecil family, life became a strange mix of public and private. They moved into a smaller wing of the house, away from the tour route, but they were still living in a tourist attraction. Imagine trying to raise 2 young boys in a house where, every day, hundreds of strangers are walking through your living room. It was an unconventional childhood, to say the least, but it was the reality of what it took to keep Biltmore alive. The boys, George and William, grew up with a unique perspective on their family's legacy. They understood from a very young age that their home was not just theirs. It belonged, in a sense, to everyone. The income from tourism was not a magic bullet. It was a struggle. The estate was still losing money, but it was enough to pay the taxes, enough to keep the staff employed, enough to prevent the house from falling into disrepair. In a time when so many were losing their jobs, Biltmore remained one of the largest employers in the region. The decision to open to the public had not just saved the house, it had saved hundreds of families from destitution. The estate employed gardeners, foresters, farmers, housekeepers, tour guides. It was a lifeline for the community. The staff who worked at Biltmore during the Depression often spoke of it as a sanctuary. While the outside world was in chaos, Biltmore was stable. It provided steady work, a sense of purpose, and a connection to something larger than themselves. Many of the families who worked at Biltmore in the 1930s would continue to work there for generations. It became a family tradition, passed down from parent to child. This sense of continuity, of loyalty, of shared purpose was one of Biltmore's greatest strengths. It wasn't just a business, it was a community. But the challenges kept coming. In 1934, Cornelia and John Cecil divorced. The The reasons were complex and personal, but the strain of living in a fishbowl, of constantly worrying about money, of trying to preserve a legacy that seemed to be slipping away, undoubtedly took its toll. Cornelia left Biltmore, never to return. She moved to Europe, remarried, and lived a quiet life, far from the public eye. She had given Biltmore her best years, and she had made the courageous decision to open it to the public. But the cost had been high. John Cecil remained at Biltmore, managing the estate and raising their two sons. The responsibility for George Vanderbilt's dream now rested squarely on his shoulders. Then came World War II. Tourism ground to a halt, gasoline was rationed, people were focused on the war effort, not on visiting grand estates. The estate was once again in jeopardy. But a new, secret purpose emerged for the great house. In 1942, as the threat of bombing raids loomed over the nation's capital, Biltmore House became a secret repository for some of America's greatest treasures. Priceless works of art from the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. were secretly transported to Asheville and stored in the unfinished music room of the mansion. For the duration of the war, Rembrandts, Van Dycks, and Raphaels sat in the quiet, climate-controlled security of Biltmore, guarded by a small, dedicated staff who were sworn to secrecy. It was a fitting role for the house. George Vanderbilt had been a passionate art collector, and now his home was protecting the nation's artistic heritage. After the war, the paintings were returned to Washington, and Biltmore's secret role in protecting them was finally revealed. It was a moment of pride for the estate and the community. After the war, tourism slowly began to recover, but the fundamental problem remained. Biltmore was too big, too expensive, too much of a relic of a bygone era. It was surviving, but just barely. It was clear that tourism alone was not enough. A new vision was needed. A new generation would have to find a way to make George Vanderbilt's dream not just survive, but thrive in the modern world. The real crisis, the one that would determine the ultimate fate of Biltmore, was still ahead. Fast forward to 1960. The post-war boom is in full swing. America is a nation of suburbs, highways, and television sets. The Gilded Age seems like a distant, almost mythical past. And at Biltmore, the second generation is facing a crisis of identity and finance. John Cecil had done a remarkable job of keeping the estate afloat through the Depression and the war. But by the late 1950s, the estate was still losing about $250,000 a year. In today's money, that's over $2.5 million earns. It was a staggering loss, and it was not sustainable. At this rate, the estate would be bankrupt within a decade. The two Cecil sons, George and William, were now grown men. George, the elder, was content to manage the traditional aspects of the estate, the farm, and the dairy. He was a capable manager, but he was not a visionary. He believed that the best they could do was to preserve what they had, to maintain the status quo, and to hope that tourism would eventually pick up enough to cover the losses. But it was William, the younger son, who inherited his grandfather's visionary spirit. And he saw the writing on the wall. Biltmore was dying a slow death. It was a magnificent museum, but it was not a viable business. It needed a radical transformation. Here's the character contrast that defines this next chapter. George Cecil represented the old way: preservation, tradition, managing the decline as gracefully as possible. But William Cecil, he was different. He had left Biltmore, gone to Harvard, and worked as a banker in New York. He had seen the modern world of finance and business. He understood profit and loss, investment and return. And he came back to Biltmore in 1960 with a revolutionary idea. He believed that Biltmore could and should be profitable, not just break even, not just survive, but actually make money. This was heresy. The goal had always been to simply break even, to preserve the estate. The idea of turning his grandfather's home into a profit-making enterprise seemed crass, commercial, and utterly at odds with the Vanderbilt legacy. The family was divided. The staff was skeptical. The community was watching. The stakes could not have been higher. If William's plan failed, it could mean the end of Biltmore. The family might finally be forced to sell, to break up the estate, to let the great house become just another beautiful, tragic memory. But if he succeeded, he could secure the estate's future for generations to come. William Cecil's vision was simple, yet profound. He believed that to save Biltmore, they had to expand, not retreat. They had to give visitors more reasons to come and more reasons to stay. They had to turn Biltmore from a 2-hour stop on a road trip into a destination in itself. He looked at the vast, underutilized resources of the estate, the land, the historic buildings, the agricultural heritage, and saw not liabilities, but opportunities. He saw potential where others saw only problems. His first major initiative was audacious. He looked at the rolling hills below the house and saw vineyards. He believed that the climate and soil of North Carolina could produce world-class wines. This was in the early 1970s, long before the American wine industry had the prestige it has today. California was just beginning to be taken seriously. The idea of planting French grape varietals in Appalachia? It seemed like a rich man's folly. His brother thought he was crazy. The staff thought he was wasting money. But William Cecil was undeterred. In 1971, he planted his first grapevines just below Biltmore House. He started small, experimenting with different varietals, learning about the soil and the climate. The first vintage, bottled in the conservatory basement, was, by his own admission, terrible. It was barely drinkable. But William Cecil was not deterred. He did what his grandfather would have done. He went to France and he hired the best. He brought back a 6th-generation French winemaster, Philippe Jourdain, to oversee the new Biltmore Estate Wine Company. They started over, replanting, experimenting, and gradually the quality of the wine improved. In 1985, they took the next huge step. They converted the old historic dairy barn, the one George Vanderbilt had built in 1900, into a state-of-the-art winery and opened it to the public. It was a massive undertaking, requiring millions of dollars in investment. But it was an immediate success. Visitors could now tour the house and then come to the winery for a tasting. It added a whole new dimension to the Biltmore experience. It was a brilliant piece of adaptive reuse, preserving a historic building while creating a new, revenue-generating attraction. It was the first major step in transforming Biltmore from a passive museum into an active, dynamic business. William Cecil proclaimed the opening of the winery the most historic event since my grandfather had opened his estate to his family on Christmas Day 90 years earlier. It was a bold statement, but it was true. The winery was a game changer. It attracted a new demographic of visitors. It created a new revenue stream, and it proved that William Cecil's vision of a profitable Biltmore was not a pipe dream. It was achievable. But William Cecil was just getting started. He saw the need for on-site lodging. Visitors were coming from all over the country, and they needed a place to stay. In 2001, the Inn on Biltmore Estate opened, finally realizing a dream that George Vanderbilt himself had sketched out a century earlier. Now, guests could not just visit Biltmore, they could stay there, experiencing the hospitality and service that was once reserved for Vanderbilt's personal guests. The inn was a luxury property with stunning views of the estate and the mountains. It was an instant success, attracting high-end travelers from around the world. This was followed by the more casual Village Hotel in 2015 and the restoration of historic cottages on the estate for overnight stays. Each new lodging option catered to a different market, expanding Biltmore's reach and appeal. He expanded the outdoor activities, offering horseback riding, fly fishing, carriage rides, and hiking trails. He opened new restaurants, focusing on a field-to-table philosophy that used produce and meat raised on the estate itself, another nod to his grandfather's vision of self-sufficiency. The Biltmore Estate Beef Program raised Angus cattle on the estate's pastures. The Biltmore Grown program supplied fresh vegetables, herbs, and fruits to the estate's restaurants. It was a closed-loop system, sustainable and authentic. Every new venture was designed to be both profitable and authentic to the spirit of Biltmore. It was a delicate balancing act, commerce and conservation, profit and preservation. But William Cecil navigated it with skill and determination. He understood that authenticity was the key. Visitors didn't want a theme park, they wanted a real living estate. They wanted to taste wine made from grapes grown on the property. They wanted to eat beef raised on the pastures they could see from the house. They wanted to stay in cottages that had once housed estate workers. It was this commitment to authenticity that set Biltmore apart from other tourist attractions. It wasn't manufactured, it was real. It was a long, slow, and often difficult process. There were setbacks, there were skeptics, there were financial risks, but William Cecil's vision and his relentless determination paid off. By the time he retired in 1995, passing the leadership of the company to his son, Bill Cecil Jr., Biltmore was no longer losing money. It was a thriving, profitable enterprise, employing over 2,000 people and attracting over 1 million visitors a year. He had done what everyone thought was impossible. He had saved his family's home, and he had created a model for how historic estates could survive and thrive in the modern world. So, what was the secret? What was the magic formula that allowed Biltmore to survive when 500 others failed? It wasn't just one thing. It was a combination of factors, a unique alchemy of vision, innovation, and a deep-seated respect for the past. It was a story of 3 generations, each facing their own unique challenges, and each making the difficult decisions necessary to preserve the legacy. But why? Why did this matter? Why should we care about the survival of one mansion when so many others were lost? Because Biltmore represents something more than just wealth or architecture. It represents the power of adaptability, the courage to change, the wisdom to see that preservation doesn't mean freezing something in time, but allowing it to evolve and grow. First, there was the vision of the founder. George Vanderbilt built Biltmore not as a static monument, but as a living, breathing, self-sustaining organism. His pioneering work in forestry and scientific agriculture laid the groundwork for everything that followed. He embedded the idea of sustainability into the DNA of the estate from the very beginning. While his peers were building houses, he was building an ecosystem. He was thinking about the land, about the forest, about the future. He created a foundation that was strong enough to weather the storms that were to come. Second, there was the courageous decision in a time of crisis. In 1930, Cornelia and John Cecil made a choice that was completely at odds with their class and their time. They chose to open their home to the public. This was the pivotal moment, the decision that saved Biltmore from ruin. It was an act of humility and pragmatism that was unheard of among the great families of the Gilded Age. While others clung to their privacy and their pride, the Cecils chose community and survival. They understood that sometimes you have to break the rules to save what you love. Third, there was the genius of the second generation. William Cecil's vision to not just preserve Biltmore, but to make it profitable, was the masterstroke that secured its future. He understood that in the modern world, a great estate could not survive as a private indulgence. It had to have a public purpose. It had to be a business. His strategy of diversification, the winery, the hotels, the restaurants, the outdoor activities, created multiple streams of revenue and transformed Biltmore into a world-class tourist destination. He took risks, he invested, he innovated, and he succeeded. And finally, there was the power of location. Ironically, the very thing that made Biltmore seem so audacious, its remote location in the mountains of North Carolina, became one of its greatest assets. Unlike the mansions of Fifth Avenue, which were sitting on some of the most valuable real estate in the world, Biltmore was not under constant pressure from developers. Its 8,000 acres acted as a protective moat, insulating it from the relentless march of urban progress. It had the space to evolve, to grow, to reinvent itself. It had the room to breathe. So the secret wasn't a secret at all. It was a philosophy that valued innovation over tradition, a philosophy that saw change as an opportunity, not a threat, a philosophy that understood that the best way to preserve the past is to make it relevant to the present. While other Gilded Age mansions became beautiful, frozen-in-time museums, or were demolished to make way for skyscrapers, Biltmore became something else entirely. It became a living, evolving, and profitable enterprise, still owned and managed by the descendants of George Vanderbilt. Today, Biltmore is more than just a house. It's a thriving business, a major employer, and a cornerstone of the Western North Carolina economy. It attracts over 1.4 million visitors a year, making it one of the most visited historic homes in America. It has a winery that produces award-winning wines. It has luxury hotels and restaurants. It has 8,000 acres of forests, gardens, and farmland. And at the center of it all is the house, the 250-room château that George Vanderbilt built over a century ago, still magnificent, still inspiring, still standing. Imagine you're standing on that same peak where George Vanderbilt stood in 1888. You look out at the same blue-tinged mountains. But now, you also see the magnificent château, the vineyards, the bustling village. You see a legacy that was not just preserved, but transformed. A dream that not only survived the greatest economic catastrophe in American history, but emerged from it stronger, more resilient, and more relevant than ever. You see families walking the gardens. You see couples toasting with glasses of estate wine. You see children running across the lawn. You see a place that is alive, that is thriving, that is serving a purpose. And you realize that this is what George Vanderbilt would have wanted. Not a museum, not a mausoleum, but a living, breathing testament to the power of vision and the resilience of the human spirit. The story of Biltmore is more than just the story of a house. It's a story about the fragility of wealth and the enduring power of vision. It's a story about the clash between the old world and the new. And it's a story that proves that even in the darkest of times, with courage, creativity, and a willingness to break the rules, the impossible can be achieved. The mansion that survived is not just a monument to the past, it is a testament to the future. It is a reminder that the greatest legacies are not the ones that are simply preserved in amber, but the ones that are allowed to grow, to change, and to adapt to the needs of each new generation. And perhaps that is the most important lesson of all. That survival is not about clinging to the past, it's about honoring the past while embracing the future. It's about understanding that the only way to truly preserve something is to make it live, to make it breathe, to make it matter. Biltmore matters. It mattered in 1895, it mattered in 1930, it mattered in 1960, and it matters today, not because it's big or beautiful or expensive, but because it represents something deeper. It represents the belief that with vision, with courage, and a willingness to adapt, anything is possible, even surviving the Great Depression when 500 others failed. The story of Biltmore teaches us that the greatest threats to our legacies are not external forces, but internal rigidity. It's not the storm that destroys the tree, but the tree's inability to bend with the wind. The Vanderbilt mansions on Fifth Avenue fell not because they were poorly built, but because they could not adapt. They were magnificent, but they were inflexible. Biltmore survived because it was willing to change, to evolve, to become something new while still honoring what it had been. The secret was never really a secret. It was always there, hidden in plain sight, in the forests that George Vanderbilt planted, in the courage of Cornelia and John Cecil, in the vision of William Cecil. It was in the land itself, in the mountains, in the people who worked there and believed in it. The mansion survived because it was more than just a mansion. It was an idea that the past and the future are not enemies, but partners. An idea that the greatest achievements are not the ones that resist change, but the ones that embrace it. And that is a secret worth remembering.